So today is a very unique class, as I'm sure that you saw from the workbook in the description. We're going to be learning how to draw a mountain inspired by the Mont Blanc mountain range. And the ultimate goal, as always, but particularly for today, is for you to use your favorite writing instruments in a brand new way. And I'm going to be using one of my favorite writing instruments that I might not have used in any of these inspired writing classes in the past, and that is my Glacier Meisterstück. We're going to get started here with kind of like a backstory introduction to why we're teaching this class all about drawing the Mont Blanc mountain. So when I first started teaching with Mont Blanc back in 2020, so we're coming up on 4 years teaching these inspired writing classes, they sent me this incredible collection of vintage postcards. So you can see the little screen right now with some of those. So I'm going to bring it up here. And this was my absolute favorite of the vintage postcard set. And I've always kind of had this in the back of my mind. You know, I would love to teach a drawing class or a painting class related to the Mont Blanc mountain and kind of just highlight how that name came to be associated with the brand Mont Blanc. So the brand name Mont Blanc was titled after the Mont Blanc Massif range, which kind of straddles along France, Italy, and Switzerland. And 4810, which you would have seen probably on all of your nibs and on some of the packaging, that refers to the individual peak of the Mont Blanc. And that's the highest mountain in the Alps and in Europe that was scaled actually for the very first time in the 18th century. And it was kind of this notion of not only admiring this incredible mountain, but also the achievement of actually scaling it that the founders of Mont Blanc really resonated with. And so the Mont Blanc, the peak of Europe, inspired the peak of writing. So a Mont Blanc pen is a pen that has reached the summit. And I just love that sentiment. So here we are today, centuries since that first summit, celebrating 100 years of the Meisterstück and commemorating that mountaintop and how it continues to inspire adventure and exploration and the peak of writing. So we actually got Mont Blanc's heritage manager involved in pulling these original ads that you see on the page here. And to give us, again, some more color and some more backstory, which I hope you also find pretty fascinating. So on the left, you see one of Mont Blanc's advertisements designed and painted by Rudolf Sternad. And the best safety pen is being compared to the Mont Blanc mountain, naming them two kings. So that's what the verbiage says on this ad here. And then on the right, it's kind of more like the modern Mont Blanc, where the graphic designers in the 1920s, they used dots and hatching, which if you read the workbook, you know that that's what we're going to be focusing on today, to represent grayscale and two-tone printing in newspaper advertisements. Okay, so we are eventually going to be working towards, again, being inspired by this vintage advertisement. We are going to be working towards our own simplified final project here today. And, you know, kind of just working with basic shapes and lines. So in order to achieve this very simple basic shapes and lines, along with some calligraphy and the 4810, which represents the peak of the Mont Blanc mountain, I am going to be using one of my favorite writing instruments, which is my Glacier Meisterstück. And I have black ink in here right now because I really like this contrast of black and white. And I also feel like it's really approachable and accessible, even if you've never drawn before, to use black ink. Of course, if you have another favorite ink color on hand, you can absolutely experiment with that as well. So when you're looking at this picture of a mountain, for example, that might feel quite intimidating to you. But instead, we're going to be breaking it down to its most basic shape. If anybody here has taken my drawing florals class, we started with circles. Literally, we spent a super long time just drawing circles like this. And we also did C curves and S curves. So in order to start warming up, I just want you to start tracing your triangle. Don't worry if your lines are straight or not. I just want you to get a sense of, you know, if you're moving faster, can you achieve a straighter line? If you're moving slow, is it harder for you to get a straight line? I just want you to start warming up by drawing a series of lines. I find if I move a little quicker, my lines are straighter. But again, this is going to take some practice just to see what works best for you. So even without adding any detail, just identifying where the light and shaded sides of the mountain are is kind of the easiest way to add some visual interest to a drawing. So since the mountains are outside, I'm going to imagine that, our light source is the sun. And I'm going to switch to my pencil to just kind of give you an example here. So I'm going to imagine that our light source is the sun. So I'm going to draw a little sun over here. And so if the sun is shining on the right side of the mountain, that means that the left side of the mountain is going to be in the shade. Okay? That is the simplest way for me to explain that, right? So you have the sun shining on the right side of the mountain, and that inevitably means that the left side is in the shade. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by placing our lines a little farther apart, and then we're going to get closer together. So farther apart like this. And again, I'm moving quite quickly. You can hold your fountain pen in any way that's comfortable. And now I have sort of equal-ish distance between those lines. Now I'm going to move those lines a little bit closer together. So already this middle section now visually is looking darker than when the lines were spaced further apart. And now for this right half here, we're going to put them pretty much on top of each other. So I'm going to go one line and right next to it. You might have some overlap. That's okay. This section here looks quite dark. So the reason this is important, again, is because hatching indicates where the shaded side of an object is. So again, we're going to start out by doing some diagonal lines. Maybe we'll even start in the middle here. And I'm going to space them. I'm almost curving there, so I'm going to try to straighten out and just finish this section here. And on this side, I'm going to try going from top to bottom, and I'm going to place them as close together as I can. This also just gives you a good indication of your range of motion. So if you find that you're kind of losing your ink towards the end, maybe you're pressing a little bit too hard, maybe you're not pressing well enough, especially if you're using a fountain pen, obviously the ink flows really smoothly across the page. And so I find, again, that's why I love drawing with them, is that it makes actually the process of drawing a lot easier. Whereas if you're using something like a ballpoint, you might have to work a little bit harder to achieve these results. I could just do that right here, and all we're going to be doing is drawing diagonal lines in the other direction, or we can draw our linear lines again, like this, and drawing diagonal lines on top. I find cross-hatching is much better suited to circular shapes. It kind of helps indicate the roundness of an object. So if you were drawing like an apple or a ball, or even like the top of a building, you might want to use cross-hatching instead of diagonal or linear hatching on its own. When it comes to drawing a mountain, again, we're working with really triangular shapes and straight lines. And so diagonal hatching is where we're going to be focusing our efforts on today. So that's cross-hatching when the lines are spaced somewhat apart. Now we're going to try it with them spaced closer together, just so you can visually see what this looks like. You kind of have to have probably at least a dozen lines in order for you to be able to tell a difference. So if my lines in the linear hatching are pretty close together, you want the cross hatch to be kind of a similar distance apart. So we wouldn't want to jump all the way up here. We kind of want to keep the spacing relatively consistent. In practice, when you're actually doing this in your artwork, you'd be moving really quickly like this. So don't feel like it has to be perfect shapes by any means, because the more I go over top of this, the darker that section becomes. So now that we've kind of walked through this hatching technique and what hatching is, again, it's to indicate the shaded side of an object. Now we are going to get into drawing the mountain shape and filling it in with our new hatching technique. Okay, so for step one, we're going to sketch 3 basic triangles. And I've already kind of done that for you here, but if you have a pencil, don't do this in pen, but if you have a pencil, let's just create 3 basic triangles, and we want to layer them. So here we have one triangle, another triangle, and that final mountain triangle is layered behind the middle one. So we're going to go up, down, and then this final triangle is going to be behind the one that you see here, just to give it a little bit more, a sense of depth in some way. And then we're going to take our writing instruments, and in my case, my Glacier Meisterstück, and I'm going to kind of rough up those straight lines to make it look more organic. So this is the visual reference of the step that we're doing right now. So instead of just going straight up and down, we want to just create some visual interest here. You don't want to round your corners like this. Kind of still looks like a mountain, but you really want to focus on sharp, straight, jagged lines and let your pen sort of do its thing. Try to accomplish that step here. So I'm going to go straight for a bit, create some jagged lines, create pretty steep peak at the top for this one. Again, same thing with our final peak, so that you have something that looks like either one of these visual references here. So now we'll move on to step 2 here. So we're going to go to the peak of each of these mountains, and we're going to create a jagged line down the center. So see, this one is a little bit off center here. So I'm going to show you an example, and then you can kind of go ahead. So instead of going straight down, I'm kind of going over to the center, then I'm going back over here. Okay, so now we're on step 4. So we've identified that the light source is on the right-hand side. And so that means that the shading should be on the left. So let's start experimenting with drawing our hatching lines closer together, farther apart. You don't necessarily have to, like in your visual reference on this side, we've kind of created hatching on the whole left side. If you want to just sort of experiment with sections, like maybe we do this section here as an example, and we don't extend all the way to the bottom, so we could have hatching like that. Or hatching, again, you just want to kind of mimic the angle that the mountain is at. So you wouldn't want your hatching, if we're indicating that it's shaded on the left side and the mountain is facing in this direction, you wouldn't want your hatching to go in that direction. So then if we wanted to do some cross hatching, we could do that here to indicate a really deep pocket of shade. But again, we're just at this point trying to understand that we're trying to give some visual shading to the left side of our mountain here. And again, why I love working with fountain pens is you get more of that organic look, that I really like. So I'm going to keep kind of working through here and just experiment with creating like large hatching lines like this, linear all the way down, maybe just working in certain pockets, like maybe I'll just work on this pocket here and make it super close together. This is sort of our practice run before we get into our final project. So with our final project, we're now incorporating the number 4810, which if you missed the beginning, that's referring to the height of the Mont Blanc mountain that straddles Italy, France, and Switzerland. So we have our practice sheet here, our final example here, and we're going to start by kind of creating that jagged mountain shape. So we have one big peak here, and then we have a little peak down here and a baby one peeking out at the back. Okay, so we're going to start with the first mountain shape. And again, we're visualizing like triangle shapes as we're drawing. And then we're adding a little bit of depth by creating the other one back here. And then little baby peak in the back. And then now we're going to start creating some of these cracks and crevices. Like I said, in this example, they're contained cracks and crevices. So you don't just have a line like that and then it stops. We're going to actually go back and just show you a very quick 5-minute modern calligraphy lesson so that if you want to be able to trace this Mont Blanc that you see on your page here, that you can follow along. So if this is a recap for you, then you're going to understand this new language that I'm speaking right now, which is downstroke, upstroke, downstroke, upstroke, downstroke, underturn, oval, downstroke, underturn, and that's your connection stroke, downstroke, cross my T, downstroke, up, down, flourish, up, down, exit stroke, oval, downstroke, upstroke, downstroke, overturn, underturn, half an oval. So we're going to manually duplicate only our downstroke. So it's kind of important for you to know, when was I moving in an upward motion? When should I be moving in a downward motion? So I'm going to just indicate that for you, and I'm going to create a little tiny box anytime I was moving in a downward motion. So anytime we're moving in a downward motion, it's a thick line, and anytime you're moving in an upward motion, it's a thin line. And this comes really with practice. So you're going to have to do it quite a few times in order to know upstrokes, downstrokes, overturn, underturn, compound curve, ovals, ascender loops, descender loops. There's a lot that goes into what just looks like beautiful writing, and that's why I love modern calligraphy. You can make your own. So thanks, everybody, and we'll see you hopefully over on Instagram at Peak Paper Co. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.